Where in the world, Nigeria, where a new wave of violence from herdsmen has killed hundreds of Christians in the northern part of the country. Church leaders are calling it ethnic cleansing. Joining us with the latest from Abuja is CBN Nigeria Director Felix Oisamoje. And joining us from our Washington, D.C. studio with the latest is Emmanuel Ogebe. Emmanuel's an international human rights attorney. He's had relatives killed in the recent violence. First, Emmanuel, tell us what happened to your family members.
Yes, Gary, just about 10 days or so ago, there was a horrific massacre in Plateau State in north-central Nigeria. And I just, saw the news from contacts there. It wasn't until a couple of days later that I learned that 6 of my relatives died in that attack. From what we've been able to piece together, the husband and his pregnant wife tried to take her out of the house to safety and come back for the kids. But they ran into the herdsmen on their way. They shot him and his pregnant wife, and they went into their home and they killed their 4-year-old son and their 6-year-old daughter, who were asleep in their beds. They also had 2 relatives who were visiting for the summer break, and those were killed as well. So this was really a horrific slaughter. Over 238 people were killed. And Gary, what breaks my heart is the brother to the gentleman who died says that the family spotted the corpses and they said, we want to take our corpses and bury them. And the authorities refused and insisted on giving them a mass burial because they don't want the truth to emerge as to how many people really died in that horrific massacre in Plateau State.
Felix, has the violence against Christians subsided or is it continuing?
Gary, I will say we have noticed some escalation in the last few months. So you are right to say it's increasing at this point.
Where is it specifically happening, Felix, and why?
It's happening more in the Middle Belt area of the country. And the reason simply is because the Fulani herdsmen take their cattle into people's farmlands. They eat up their crops on the farm, and when the people challenge them, then before you know, they respond with AK-47s.
Where do they get the AK-47s? So I understand this is different than the Boko Haram violence, those terrorists. Where do they get the AK-47s, and why are they responding that way?
That has been the question because given how much an AK-47 will go for, a Fulani herdsman will probably need to sell all his cattle to be able to buy an AK-47.
Gary, what we have is a genocide. They are trying to displace the Christians, they're trying to possess their lands, and they're trying to impose their religion on the so-called infidels and pagans who they consider Christians to be.
Who is funding them? Who's providing them with the weapons, and why?
Yeah, now, that's a very good question. We've always wondered how they could afford such sophisticated arms. In the few occasions where they run into the military, they overpower the military with the level of weaponry. And there's several theories. One of them, of course, is that the arms proliferation that resulted from the collapse of Libya saw an influx of arms into the country that fell into the hands of both Boko Haram and the Fulani herdsmen. But even more sinister is the fact that a lot of these cattle are owned by very rich Fulanis who are in government and who are in power. So there is a strong belief that the Fulanis, the ruling elite, are actually funding these herdsmen to conduct these attacks because that way they can dominate politically and they can dominate physically in terms of land grab. The attacks are coming from the Fulani herdsmen who actually brought jihad. They brought violent jihad to Nigeria in 1804. And many believe that this is simply a continuation of that jihad. I can tell you that in Plateau State in particular, over 50 communities of Christians have been cleared, they've been de-Christianized. The Christians have been pushed out, and these communities have been overrun and taken over by the Fulani herdsmen and their cattle. So this group is actually worse than Boko Haram. Boko Haram has rules of engagement. They have some kind of ideology. These people slash, kill, and burn. I think they exemplify what the scripture says in John 10:10. The thief comes but to steal, to kill, and destroy. And they're destroying. Christians are being hunted on their farms, in their homes. They're being slaughtered. This is a genocide. In Benue State alone, this year, over 500 Christians have been killed in that one state, including, Gary, you must have heard about this, the shocking attack in April where they attacked a church mass and they killed 19 people, including the priests who were serving communion in the church that morning. So 19 worshippers were killed in church. One more recent incident, last weekend, the Archbishop of the Anglican Church of Jos, his home was attacked and one person was killed. So, Gary, what we have is a genocide. They are trying to displace the Christians, they're trying to possess their lands, and they're trying to impose their religion on the so-called infidels and pagans who they consider Christians to be.
CBN, I know, has worked in Nigeria for years, Felix, and I know in the past we've reached out to help people displaced by the Boko Haram violence. So what are we doing now to help?
One of the things our team just came back from a place called Kagoro in the north central area of Nigeria, where has experienced a lot of violence as well related to the Fulani herdsmen. We just came back from doing a whole 1 week of free medical services to that area because a lot of people are suffering with no medical attention. So we've been able to go there and provide free medical services. And right now we are talking with another group on the outskirts of Jos that just happened this past week. We are talking to a group there to see if we can go in there, probably do a medical mission as well, and then do some kind of empowerment projects. And so we're talking, but we can't move in now because it's still too volatile to go in there. So we're waiting until things settle down, then we'll go in there and see what we can do to help the people.
So what can our viewers do, Emmanuel?
Well, there are several things that could be done. Obviously, the first is prayer. But we're at a point where thoughts and prayers are not sufficient anymore. Over 2,000 people have died from the violence in Nigeria this year already. We're talking about deaths in the thousands. Nigeria is now the deadliest place in the world to be a Christian. And so we need international pressure. The UK House of Lords just last week had a debate, and they said this is no longer a herdsman-farmer conflict. This is genocide. Most of the Lords were consistent in their depiction of what is happening. Now, in addition to that, we need aid. You know, I know that CBN 700 Club is in Nigeria. So if people support CBN, we know that CBN will deliver to the people who are afflicted. But we need the members of Congress, the U.S. Congress, write to your congressman. They need to appoint a special envoy on the issue of Nigeria. And also the United States needs to not sell aircraft to General Buhari's regime. The Nigerian Air Force has been used in attacks against Christian communities that tried to defend themselves against the herdsmen in Adamawa State. The U.S. shouldn't sell aircraft to General Buhari, who will use them against Christians. And so I think there are lots of things that can be done, but these are some of the key things that should happen.
I think one of the things we need the most is prayers, because I personally believe that nothing happens that doesn't have a spiritual background. So whatever is going on right now has some kind of spiritual underpinnings. And I believe that if we begin to deal with it from that point, it makes it easier. After all, the Bible tells us that we do not war against flesh and blood. And so we know that there's spiritual issues. So we need to pray. That's the first thing we need. We need prayers that God will continue to protect Christians wherever they are all over the country. And the other thing, too, is to sensitize the international community to what is going on here, because I believe that once that happens and people know that it's not only Nigerians that are crying out, that then probably it will make them begin to see that people are taking notice outside of the country, and probably that will dissuade them from their plans.
Yeah, and Gary, if I can say one last thing, there is a Christian girl who was abducted by Boko Haram, and they asked her to convert to Islam, or and then she would be set free, and she refused. She's a 15-year-old girl. Her name is Leah, and Leah stood for Christ and has been held by the terrorists for 135 days now. So I want everyone who hears this to pray for Leah. She's a genuine heroine of the faith in this era.
And there are many of them there in Nigeria. We appreciate them, and we'll be praying for her as well.